Before you ever see the location, the story is told by the air itself. The area around Andrew Mountbatten Windsor's new home has an unmistakable smell, thick with wet mud and the earthy dampness of marshland, occasionally broken by the sharp tang of manure drifting across from nearby fields, according to those who have recently ventured out into the Norfolk countryside. Using phrases like spooky, dreary, and weirdly lifeless, one journalist who travelled there painted a picture of the location of one of the most contentious individuals in royal life. This is quite the dramatic turn of events for a man who lived for almost 20 years in the expansive grandeur of Royal Lodge in Windsor, surrounded by well-kept gardens and all the trappings of status and privilege. Several reports state that he is not at all pleased about it. It would be startling enough to smell like swampy soil. But it seems to be only one part of a larger, more unsettling picture. Reports have consistently highlighted the property's alleged out-of-control bug problem, with some tabloids even going so far as to call his new residence a swamp house that fights rodents and other unwanted creatures. To be completely honest, anyone who is familiar with rural Britain will tell you that rural properties frequently have to deal with rats, mice, moles, and other creatures, particularly in areas with older buildings, farmland, standing water, and the kind of damp conditions that seem to characterize this particular corner of Norfolk. In and of itself, this is hardly remarkable, but context always makes all the difference. Every typical rural annoyance becomes something much more when Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, a man not exactly known for being laid back or modest, moves into such a house. Dramatic, and every negative element turns into a new headline in a story that seems to get more embarrassing every month. For what seems like an eternity, the housing scandal has persisted. He had been residing at Royal Lodge since 2003, but after several years, there was growing pressure for him to move out. Conflicts about maintenance duties, security funding, and the more general issue of whether such a magnificent royal property should be occupied were reported by someone who is no longer performing any official obligations on behalf of the monarchy. The focus eventually turned north to Norfolk, where a smaller house called Marsh Farm was being prepped for his move. However, the relocation did not go smoothly or quietly, as one might anticipate given the previous events surrounding Andrew. First, it was said that he was temporarily residing in Wood Farm, another Sandringham estate home with its own royal history, most notably as the location where Prince Philip lived in quiet seclusion for the majority of his retirement. Wood Farm has a respectable reputation, a sense of heritage and dignity. But Marsh Farm appears to have sparked an entirely different response. Various stories state that before Andrew could move in permanently, renovations had to be finished. As a result, weeks went by, followed by more weeks, during which time every little development became news. Was he refused to leave? Was he postponing the inevitable on purpose? Was the house just unprepared? Or was there another activity taking place in the background? The specifics are still being revealed, but the entire procedure turned into yet another public humiliation in a long queue of them. Then, on Easter Monday, it was finally confirmed by news that Andrew had spent his first night at Marsh Farm. There was no spectacular birth, no happy family welcome documented for public consumption, no smiling photos sent to the media, just another awkward, uncomfortable chapter in a tale whose uneasiness seems to grow with every year that goes by. By all accounts, the condition of the place has reportedly infuriated Andrew. Nothing in this circumstance seems to have lived up to his expectations or standards, from the ongoing rat problem to the ubiquitous smell of wet earth. The road going to the estate felt desolate and lonely, devoid of any warmth or charm one could associate with a place like Wolferton, according to the journalist who visited the region. Charming village in England. She pointed out that there were no lively local businesses, no quaint pubs with personality, and no feeling of community. Rather, she remarked that the stench of moist mud truly caught her off guard and described an overgrown field to the garden. Now, anyone who has actually spent time in the country knows that depending on the season, the weather, and what's going on nearby farms, fields being worked, and drainage, rural regions can smell earthy, damp, and distinctly agricultural. Livestock, marshland, and systems. Each of these elements has the potential to significantly impact both the olfactory experience and the quality of the air. However, you can tell that this isn't exactly exuding palace glamour or royal elegance when a published study highlights the scent as one of the first noteworthy characteristics that truly stuck out. And that's actually the essence of the difference here, the reason these stories have such an impact. The expansive home known as Royal Lodge was closely linked to opulence, prestige, and luxury. They conveyed strength and significance. Conversely, stories have compared Marsh Farm to the red brick house of a wealthy middle-class businessman. That is, of course, a very respectable residence that many common people would feel privileged to live in, but it is hardly the image that was originally associated with the guy who was often referred to, correctly or not, as the Queen's so-called favorite son. That specific phrase. It hurts because it shows how drastically Andrew's viewpoint has evolved over time. The headlines now focused on whether the garden appears neglected and whether the air smells bad. Previously, this person was front and center at important royal events, traveling on abroad trade missions and attending big ceremonies with all the trappings of prestige. Additionally, there were allegations that fresh security measures had been put in place prior to his arrival, indicating that real-world worries about privacy and security are still major concerns. He still needs a certain amount of security, even in shame and type of exile. The issue is made even more ironic by the fact that one assessment found that there was surprisingly little privacy surrounding the house itself. After years of resisting attention and intrusion, a man now resides in an area that is reportedly easier to spot from the outside. Next is the pest problem, which has started to appear frequently in tabloid reporting. Marsh Farm has been described as a swamp home in a number of sources, which also assert that there is a serious rat infestation in the region. As previously stated, rats, mice, foxes, moles, and other wildlife are commonplace on many rural properties in Britain. Pests are naturally drawn to sheds, moist ground, farms, feed stores, and older buildings. Furthermore, this situation is by no means unique. However, once more, context is crucial. Every common rural problem is magnified and dramatized when Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, a man who is said to have strict standards and a temperament that does not manage inconvenience well, moves into such a property. The status of the new house is undoubtedly making things worse, and friends and family are reportedly worried about his mental health. Additionally, there's another reason why these stories have a powerful emotional impact on the people and garner a lot of attention. They paint a clear picture of exile. Naturally, this is a type of social and symbolic exile rather than official exile in any formal sense. He is no longer portrayed in the media or seen by the general population as a prominent royal figure with status, influence, and relevance. Rather, he is described as a marginalized cousin who lives in the Norfolk countryside while the functioning monarchy proceeds without him, carrying out its responsibilities, upholding its public persona and maintaining its reputation completely apart from his life. The mention of visitors has just made that feeling of marginalization more intense. Before Easter, Prince Edward, Andrew's younger brother, reportedly stopped by Marsh Farm for what was described as a private conversation. Other headlines used considerably harsher language, referring to Edward as a royal henchman dispatched to handle a challenging situation and send to give a message. Whether the characterization is fair or true is up for debate, but it undoubtedly demonstrates how spectators and pundits understand the family dynamics at work. There was a time not very long ago when Andrew was frequently spotted on international trade missions as a special representative, attending important state ceremonies, traveling with security and status, and taking advantage of all the benefits and trappings of royal life. Coverage today centers on whether his new home smells bad, whether the lawn is overgrown, and whether he was basically forced to unpack his baggage and come to terms with his new situation. It is one of the most drastic drops in popularity in contemporary royal history. Of course, his supporters would contend, and some do, that he still has a right to a private life and a house free from unrelenting criticism and media attention. Every family has challenging members, they would explain. Property has its shortcomings, and not all headlines have to be harsh or disparaging. However, detractors would argue that he was responsible for many of these situations through his decisions, relationships, and actions, and that the public sympathy for him is still very limited due to the ongoing controversies surrounding him, particularly his well-documented relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, which he has consistently denied involved any wrongdoing on his part. And that strain, that unsolved dispute between empathy and condemnation, which explains why such stories garner so much interest and spark so much debate. Yes, it appears to be only about a house, a move, renovations, odors, and pests. Beneath, however, it is about repercussions, status, familial power relations, and what happens when someone who was previously at the top of the social ladder finds themselves in a totally different world. The setting itself gives the story a certain atmospheric weight. The surrounding ancient railway station has been abandoned and silent since the 1960s, adding to Wolferton's eerie, almost melancholic atmosphere. It was once a busy stop for royals visiting Sandringham for holidays and events, but it is now a faded memorial to a bygone era. There's something strangely appropriate about the background, the symbolism of an abandoned station from a bygone era next to the new residence of a man whose own era as a monarch has so blatantly and unmistakably ended. What comes next then? As the novelty wears off and focus moves elsewhere, Marsh Farm might develop into a calm long-term base and the headlines eventually disappear. Maybe further tales about repairs, neighbors, guests, or additional conflict brewing within the family behind closed doors surface. Calm and quiet don't seem to last very long with Andrew. However, the public's perception of the image is firmly established for the time being. A former senior. Under duress, the once powerful and well-known prince left his previous home, travelled to Norfolk, and took up residence in a muddy, depressing home that was plagued by a persistent bug issue. 20 years ago, no one could have expected this kind of royal chapter. What are your thoughts? Is Marsh Farm just a typical rural house being unfairly ridiculed and overstated by an antagonistic media? Or does it really depict the extent of Andrew's actual decline in fortunes? Tell me what you think in the comments section and whether you like royal. Make sure you subscribe for such updates and analysis.